Mr. Byrne. Amendment number 005, which is in your folders. And the gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The current federal fishery management system for reef fish in the Gulf of Mexico, which includes the red snapper, depends on stock assessments and data collected by the NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service to support the quota system used by fishery managers to establish season lengths and to make other determinations under the specific fishery management plan. Unfortunately, the current system has proven unsuccessful and devastating to our coastal communities who depend upon this industry as a way of life. The system is failing. On March 27th of this year, the United States District Court for the District of Columbia found that NOAA Fisheries does not have reliable data on which to base the quotas used to establish season lengths. Let me say that again. The United States District Court for the District of Columbia found that NOAA Fisheries does not have reliable data on which to base the quotas used to establish season lengths. The result is a shortened 2014 red snapper season in the Gulf of Mexico to just 9 days. It starts on June 1 and ends on June 9th. It will be a derby season, which means we'll have people racing out into the Gulf to try to fish during this very short period of time. And I can tell you in certain weather conditions that can actually be dangerous. The inadequacy of generated data from NOAA Fisheries, the infrequency of surveys, and the insufficient use of independent research in developing stock assessments all leads to the simple conclusion that the agency lacks the ability to adequately determine whether overfishing has occurred or to prevent overfishing from occurring in the future. In developing the stock assessment for reef fish in the Gulf, NOAA not only does not sample on reef structures, as we heard in committee a couple months ago, where these fish live and thrive, they actually refuse to acknowledge that reef structures, both natural and artificial, are even relevant to conducting stock assessments. As Mr. Fleming noted during that testimony, it's like looking for the timber wolf in a desert. Off the coast of Alabama alone, there are over 17,000 artificial reef structures. I personally joined marine scientists from both the Dauphin Island Sea Lab and the University of South Alabama 2 weeks ago in examining fish populations on a number of these structures, only to find them teeming with fish. They are covered up with red snapper. The red snapper are so plentiful that they're eating the other fish on the reef, and the snapper are huge. This is why I am proud to submit this amendment, which removes NOAA Fisheries from this process and places the responsibility for conducting stock assessments used for management purposes by the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council for reef fish in the Gulf of Mexico in the hands of the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission. The Commission has held the capacity to examine the health of our marine resources in the Gulf for over 60 years since it was founded by an act of Congress in 1949, and it has a proven track record in its ability to make fishery management recommendations on a collaborative, and let me emphasize this, a scientific basis. This amendment will ensure that the Commission will take into account the relevant habitats and biological features of the stock in question, including sampling on reef structures, while also calling for a rigorous independent review process. Ultimately, this change will help to establish a better understanding of the reef fishery and provide the Gulf Council with the information they need to establish reasonable management practices. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the staff of the committee for working so hard on coming up with this amendment. I want to thank Mr. Fleming for his leadership on it. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your leadership on it. As I was sitting out in the Gulf of Mexico 2 weeks ago with two of the most knowledgeable scientists on reef fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, Dr. Bob Shipp and Dr. John Dindo, who between them have decades of experience with this fishery in the Gulf of Mexico, I was reminded that our scientists on the Gulf Coast understand this fishery. And by turning this over to them and allowing them to make these decisions in conjunction with the Gulf State Council, we can get our fishery back for the people of the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to say a few words about Mr. Byrne's amendment. Now this amendment makes a number of troubling changes to the stock assessment process that would likely lead to overfishing of red snapper, a stock that is just now starting to show signs of rebuilding after more than 20 years of being overfished. It would fundamentally undermine standardized, statistically sound sampling procedures and would inherently bias stock assessments by mandating where and how fisheries survey data is collected. It would place responsibility for reef fish stock assessments in the hands of the Gulf State Marine Fisheries Commission, excluding federal agencies from the management of federal resources. And I'm sure we'll all agree it would be great if the Commission wants to help bear the financial burden of conducting stock assessments, but do they even have the resources to collect and analyze the necessary data? And it is for all these reasons, Mr. Chairman, that I urge opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time for further discussion. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to speak in favor of Mr. Byrne's amendment. I think it is absolutely the way we need to go in looking at data across the board. And, Mr. Chairman, as you know, I have a bill, H.R. 3063, the Healthy Fisheries Through Better Science Act, and that bill seeks to address exactly some of the issues that Mr. Byrne brings up, and that is the lack of depth and the lack of data through these stock assessments. And what my legislation would do, and is very much in parallel with what Mr. Byrne wants to do in his amendment, is to make sure we're looking at all the different sources of data. His amendment doesn't exclude data. What it says is we ought to be looking at everything. We ought to be going to fishermen using observational data. That data is valuable. I can tell you my son works on the water every day as a waterman, and that data, that observational data, is critical if we're going to be making the right decisions. Why would we want to deny observational data from fishermen? We want to make sure it's validated, but they're on the water every day. I want to make sure we're doing that. I want to make sure, too, that we're looking for information in the right places, as you said. If we're doing surveys in areas where we know fish don't exist, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I want to make sure we're also gathering data from universities. They gather a tremendous amount of useful data. I want to make sure that we're gathering that, as well as other non-governmental sources. You know, just because it's not generated by National Marine Fisheries Service doesn't mean it's good, useful, valid data in making fisheries decisions. So I think Mr. Byrne's effort there takes us in the right direction, and I want to make sure that those are things that we're highlighting in Magnuson-Stevens to make sure we're using all the data. If we're going to make sure that our fisheries managers do the right job, we owe it to the users of the resource, we owe it to the resource, and we owe it to the managers of the resource to make sure every bit of information is at their avail to make decisions. And especially today, where we're lacking any data at all on many stocks, why wouldn't we want to look at every source of information? Yes, we should go through the effort to validate it, to make sure that it is useful and that we can make sure that there's integrity in the data, but we ought to be looking at every opportunity to be able to do that. And I speak in strong support of Mr. Byrne's amendment. I thank him for offering it, and it's right along the lines with the bill that I put in place, the Healthy Fisheries Through Better Science Act.
The gentleman yield?
Yes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I too want to lend my support to Mr. Byrne's amendment. The issue is that the data has been spoken is not there, and what NOAA has been using is clearly flawed in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is a way to make sure that people on the ground or on the water have some input. I think it's a good amendment, and I support it. Now yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just sum up by saying anything that we can do to improve stock assessments by gathering data from any different source I think is absolutely critical. And this amendment allows us to move in that direction, especially in a fishery as critical as we see down there in the Gulf. And there are a lot of issues there, but making sure that everybody across the board has faith in the management system. If we don't have faith in the management system, then we're doing a disservice in how that management system is structured. This amendment through Magnuson-Stevens Act gives us the opportunity to move things in the right direction, to get good science, to make good decisions, and build confidence and trust back in the decision-making process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman, yield back. Further discussion on the amendment. Gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also speak in support of the Byrne's amendment. I'm on that, in fact, I'm committee chairman, subcommittee chairman of that subcommittee, and we've had a number of hearings on this and related issues. And look, an important data point is the empirical information, and that is fishermen tell us there's a lot of fish out there, a lot of red snapper, much more than what can be caught or should be determined by the number of days allowed. Also, when this law was originally written, the technologies that are available today were not even thought about. And so we have many other ways of testing and determining. We also know that NOAA makes deliberately conservative decisions based on lack of data. And also it arose from our discussion, they oftentimes sample in areas that we know that particularly reef fish don't even exist. So there's many reasons why their data is flawed, why we should add many other points of data. And look, if they want to weigh the data in different ways to suggest that other forms of analysis are not as important, fine. We can deal with that later. But the point is, the more information, the better, the more accurate we can be. And so for that reason, I support the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman, yield back. Further discussion, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to speak in favor of Mr. Byrne's amendment as someone who has grown up on the Gulf of Mexico and enjoys red snapper fishing. You've seen over the last 100 years a migration of the red snapper to the west side of the Gulf because of the oil rigs that have been created there. NOAA refuses to acknowledge that can become essential habitat. And yet, when we remove rigs, we see thousands of fish following that rig as it's being pulled away, saying to the world, you're taking away our home. You're taking away essential habitat. This is, and I know that our subcommittee chairman mentioned technology, but common sense is not a new technology. This is a common sense issue. Here's what people need to understand. That fish that does not exist, according to the National Marine Fisheries, that fish that does not exist, when that fish is hooked and brought up 100 feet and comes over your transom and placed in your box, that fish now exists against your bag limit. And so what we're wanting is just fairness. We're wanting common sense, that if that fish exists at the bottom, swimming, that fish also, we agree, will exist according to your catch limit. You can't just make up this as you go on. This is a common sense amendment, and as someone who is an avid fisherman for multiple generations on the Gulf of Mexico, I encourage all of our committee to support the Byrne amendment because this is common sense, and this applies down in the Gulf of Mexico that I will be leaving and going to on Friday. That I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Further discussion on the amendment. If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.